Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Tanoa Talk. I am the Kava, and as always, it is so good to be with you. Today, we are going to be talking about a really great chapter in a book, and the name of the chapter is The Sacred Root, and it's about Sakau in Pohnpei. Now, if you're wondering what Sakau is the word that Pohnpeians use for Kava. And there are a lot of differences in the ways that Pohnpeians prepare and drink Kava compared to other Pacific cultures. And I thought it would be really useful to talk in depth about this chapter with the listeners, because it's a really fascinating piece of research and a really fascinating summary of the way that Pohnpeians drink Kava or Sakau in Pohnpei. So Kava or Sakau is a species very tightly woven into the traditional practices of the people of Pohnpei. And there's no real boundary between culture and plant. And a huge number of people in Pohnpei drink Kava and have been drinking Kava for a long time. You hear a lot about this word mana in Pacific Island cultures. Well, in Pohnpei, they use the word wahoo to talk about culture, society, and people. And wahoo is based on people's reverence for and the ritual use of this plant. So when you have wahoo, it means that you have a lot of respect. A person with a lot of wahoo is somebody who is served kava immediately when the kava is prepared, and then as you go down in rank, the time difference between when the kava is prepared and when you get to drink the kava it becomes more vast. This paper talks quite extensively about Garibaldi and Turner's use of the concept or the term cultural keystone species. And in their work from 2004, they defined cultural keystone species as the culturally salient species that shape in a major way the cultural identity of a people, as reflected in the fundamental roles these species have in diet, materials, medicine, and or spiritual practices. Now, it's important to note here that in Garibaldi and Turner's work, they focused primarily on the use of different tree species in parts of Native American cultures in the Pacific Northwest, I believe. And those tree species were used to construct canoes, construct different kinds of tools, and other objects that were central to the culture of those people. And one of the intentions of writing that ethnographic paper was to protect the environment around the indigenous people that they were writing about, and to make sure that those species were still available to the people, the indigenous people of that area. She goes on to talk about how Kava fits the identified cultural influence of the cultural keystone species, and is considered to have a very high ranking within that index. So basically, Kava, as a cultural keystone species for indigenous people who consume it, is a central and very important crop for them. It's important to understand here that a lot of different crops have this significance in different cultures, not just Kava, not just that tree species that I was discussing earlier. For example, the Navajo and the Anasazi had corn at the central of their cosmology, and corn was considered to be extremely sacred and respected, and corn ceremonies would mark the transition of seasons, the harvest, and so forth. And to this day, these groups still hold corn to be sacred. Amongst the Maya, cacao is considered to be sacred, and that which is the plant that chocolate is made from. And cacao plays an important role in rituals and sacred coronations and things within Mayan culture. And also important to note that corn is similarly considered to be very sacred in Mayan culture. Now, if you're a Christian, you might know that in communion, when you go to eat the body of Christ and drink the blood of Christ, that you drink wine, red wine. So wine has that dual purpose of being a commercial item that is for sale to consumers, and anybody can go and buy a bottle of wine so long as you're of age. But it's also considered sacred in communion, and it's important, to use this anecdote or this example because kava is similar. Kava plays a sacred central role in a lot of these cultures, but it's also a commodity. It's also an agricultural commodity that has been commercialized in some parts of the world. And that does not diminish its importance or value in indigenous cultures. It just creates more economic opportunities for farmers. Similarly, sheep are considered sacred in Judeo-Christian Islamic traditions. The sacrifice of a sheep, Abraham sacrificed a sheep in place of a child to God, and God accepted that sacrifice. Jesus is referred to as the Lamb of God. But people still eat sheep. People still eat mutton and lamb, and that's just the way it's been for hundreds of years. So I just wanted to go over that really quickly because as we walk through this paper, you'll see the important mythology and cultural and social purposes that Sakau or Kava play in the role of in Pohnpeian culture and society. And it's very interesting, and you should definitely always be mindful when you drink Kava of the Papuan, the Ni Vanuatu, the Fijian, the Tongan, the Samoan, the Pohnpeian, the Hawaiian, etc. traditions that exist around Kava in those cultures, and be mindful and respectful as you drink the Kava, that you're not, mocking or doing anything satirical in relation to those cultures. Now, in this section of this paper on botany, there's no real purpose to kind of redefine what Kava is, because hopefully by episode 5, you know what Kava is, what Piper methysticum is, and the general features of the plant and the height of the plant and when it's harvested. But one really interesting piece of information in here, and I went ahead and read another paper that was referenced in here, was that Kava grows very well in the upland forests of Pohnpei, and the Nature Conservancy, in coordination with the Conservation Society of Pohnpei, encouraged farmers to take the Kava back down to the lowlands because they were basically deforesting and destroying the watersheds in Pohnpei. And as Kava or Sakau grew in popularity, they planted more and more Kava and went deeper and deeper into the forests, and destroyed a lot of ecosystems. I bring this up, and the author brings this up, because as Kava grows in popularity internationally, the supply will not meet the demand, and there needs to be more work done to expand the agricultural production of Kava around the world. The authors go on to talk about how many cultivars exist in Pohnpei, and thankfully I've tried these cultivars. But before that, they discussed briefly that Fiji has 11 cultivars of Kava. Vanuatu has 82 cultivars of Kava, and that's why it's referred to as the heartland of Kava. Tonga has 8, Tahiti has 14, and the two cultivars in Pohnpei are Romwanger and Ramadel. And again, like I said, I've tried both of these varieties. They are quite different from anything else that you can find on the market. They're not really easy to find. I don't know the last time that I saw Micronesian or Pohnpeian Kava on the market, but if you do get a chance to try it, it's worth it. Just be sure that it's coming from a trusted source and does not have any contamination. The next part of the paper talks about the mythological origins of Sakau on Pohnpei, and this part was super interesting, and I'm going to read it at some length because I think it would benefit the listener to compare this to some of the other myths, such as those that are in Vanuatu and Tonga and Fiji. It's a bit different, and it's a bit wordy. So if you'll bear with me, I'm just going to read this whole thing. But first, let me give you a little bit of background. This myth was transcribed by the daughter of a gentleman named Llewellyn Bernhardt, who lived from 1866 to 1946, and he was a writer who wrote the first book by a Micronesian to be published, and he sat down with his daughter in his later years and narrated these myths to her, and she transcribed them and preserved them for all of our benefits. And his origin story of Kava is so interesting that I just cannot help but to read it at length. And just bear with me. It's maybe 5 or 6 minutes of narration. In the beginning, there was a man named Waideneger. He was a master prayer. He used to pray to Luke, the god of the Luke clan. This man was a very old man. He was no longer able to walk about, for he was blind. Now, when he was a young man, he had planted a coconut tree. This coconut tree he planted and dedicated to Luke. And when it bore fruit, the man kept collecting the coconuts at the base of the tree all the time. It made no difference if they sprouted. He would just keep piling them up always. Eventually, he became an old man and went blind, and the coconuts of the palm tree became offerings to the god, for he had offered them to Luke. This is why Luke appeared to him when he was old. Now, Waideneger used always to lie on his mat, for he was an old man, and he had heard what seemed to be a person stepping on his taboo place, the pile of coconuts, for he used to make offerings to Luke. He then asked his identity, saying, "Are you man or god?" Luke replied, "I am Luke. You are to come with me." Waideneger replied, "I am an old man and can no longer see things and can no longer walk about, for I am weak." But Luke called to him a second time, saying to him, "Stretch out your hand to me, that I may get you." He then stretched out his hand to Luke, and Luke then took it and helped the man stand up. And when his hand touched Luke's hand, he became strong and could see things. Luke then took the man with him, and they went and got a banana skin of the variety karat, and made a canoe of it, and rowed it to Madolenehu. They then paddled upwind off Alakop. They took out their kurap, which is coconut meat with turmeric and a traditional body ointment, and anointed themselves with it. They then threw away the squeezings in the sea in a certain pool. Some fish came and ate up the squeezings. They then gave these fish the name of Arinij. This is what they are named to this day. The two then went on to Kinakpau and spent the night on the shore, and then walked up to Inemwan And then the two men went out to Na. They walked on out to the south of Na. The two men then went on until they got to a place named Pejiko. They then met a married couple there. This is where it gets interesting. Januk and Katnuk. The woman was preparing a likpuake, which is like a necklace. This is an ornament for a man's breast. The woman then conceived a liking for Luke and gave him the necklace as a love gift, giving it to Luke. Luke repaid her with skin from the man's heel. So basically, Luke takes a piece of skin off of his heel and gives it to this woman and her husband, and told this woman to take it and bury it in the earth, for it would sprout and form a plant. Supposedly, if people would drink its juice, they would become intoxicated with it, and it would change their life. The two then walked on further to another place and found a dead person whom they were going to bury. Luke said to them, "You people bury this person carefully, for it will sprout and make a plant, and you shall give it the name of sugarcane, and it will be named Southern Sugarcane." The man now went back. Luke took Wadinagar back to his original home in Wennick in the section of Malanut. Various people used to watch and be amazed at how the rats would go and eat at the base of the clump of the plant, and how after they had eaten the plant they would get weak as if they were sick from it. They were no longer able to run about, but would simply crawl about on the ground and go over to the place where the clump of sugarcane was, and also eat some of it, and then go to sleep, and then that was it. Now the people of the land tried eating some of the roots of the plant, Sakau, and all those who tried it became intoxicated. They therefore named the plant intoxication, because people ate it and became lightheaded from it. And they also tried eating the sugarcane, and they found it likewise delicious because it was sweet. The people of heaven were in heaven and looking down on the earth, and they saw how the people of that land would consume the Sakau and would become intoxicated from it. Accordingly, one day, two of them descended to investigate what the plant was like. They descended to Pejiko to ascertain the nature of Kava. The two of them stole a cutting of Kava. They took it up to heaven, and they gave it to Nanentinlan and to Nanentinpantanlan. Butchering this pronunciation, I apologize. The two of them took it and planted it in Dewinglang, a garden plot which was in Pwetenlang. And that is a place in heaven. That's not a place in Pohnpei. The two planted it on that day and had a feast with it on the same day. When the kava was dug up, it was a very big kava plant. The kava was split on that very day. When they were pounding it on that day, a joint of kava, a joint being like a node, bounced out as they prepared the kava and fell down on Malanut at Wadinagar's place and sprouted there. This was the beginning of the kava plant multiplying in Pohnpei. Now here are the names of the women who took the kava up to heaven: Leteme and Litopra. All right, so thank you for bearing with me if you were able to make it to the end there. So some similarities in that mythology to other myths and other creation stories about kava are that at one point a dead body is buried, and from that dead body a kava plant emerges. And from that kava plant that emerges, people observe rats eating or chewing kava and then becoming intoxicated. And that gives them the idea to go ahead and try kava themselves. This is interesting because in Ethiopia there's a similar myth about coffee. And coffee plants, as you may or may not know, come from Ethiopia. And one of the myths surrounding the discovery of coffee was that farmers, sheep herders, were able to witness their sheep or lambs eating the cherries of coffee trees and then becoming very excitable. And so that's how the Ethiopians first discovered and tried coffee. Now, in another tradition, kava is being prepared in Pohnpei, and the gods become jealous of the people making the kava and how happy they look. So they basically cast the kava out of Pohnpei to other Pacific islands, and the people of Pohnpei lose the kava, and the only way to get it back is by having some of the Pohnpeians visit these neighboring islands and drink some of the kava, and when nobody's looking, steal away the kava. And the way that they steal it is quite interesting. So here's another quote, and it's not as long, don't worry. A woman who visited Kasre was pounding Sakau, and while doing so, she spread her legs, and a little piece of Sakau root fell into her vagina. She pushed it up further and closed her legs. She then left Kasre and came back to Pohnpei. This is why the Sakau now on Pohnpei has a smell to it, while the one that grows in Kasre does not. The spots that formed on the stems of Sakau from Pohnpei were the result of being in the woman's vagina. So yeah, that's the myth of how Kava got back to Pohnpei after the gods became annoyed at the happiness, or jealous of the happiness of the people, and cast Kava out of Pohnpei. The next part of the paper discusses the traditional uses of Sakau or Kava on Pohnpei. Very interesting. Drinking kava for 20 plus years, I never really thought of Pohnpei as being a place where kava is consumed so frequently, and where it's such a keystone of kind of every cultural situation. There we go, cultural keystone species. But yeah, it turns out that in Pohnpei, kava is known by everybody, and its importance is known and respected by everybody. So I'm going to read this really short quote, which I think conveys the importance of Sakau quite well for Pohnpeians. Sakau is always something that all Pohnpeians understand. It has its own power, and it is highly respected by those that most people respect. It is frequently used between human beings, families, leaders, clans, in all matters. Happy families, sad families, a family that needs help, a family that loses a loved one, a family that will bring in somebody from other families. You use Sakau to go and ask for a girl. You use Sakau when you are giving thanks to somebody who helped you in medicine. You share Sakau with your friends. Sometimes enemies must use Sakau to create a different relationship, meaning to end the confrontation and to create peace between the two people or multiple people. And you use Sakau when you ask for land, the right to use land. You use Sakau for funerals and for 4 seasons of harvesting, feasts based on what we have on the land. You bring it for the chiefs who are the most responsible for the people within their kingdoms, for anything, solving needs, answering questions, helping in their situations. Now, one of the main differences between kava preparation in Pohnpei and in other countries and other islands in the Pacific is the use of hibiscus bark to prepare the kava. This is done by peeling the bark off of the hibiscus tree, and the kind of slimy core of the tree potentiates the kava. So they lay the kava down after pounding the kava. They lay it down inside of this hibiscus bark. And if you're on the Facebook page of the Kava Lounge, you'll see a picture that I posted on June the 3rd of somebody squeezing kava through hibiscus bark. And I actually got that from this paper. But basically the slimy interior part of the bark, it acts as a potentiator of the kava lactones. So the kava goes inside of this peeled bark, it's closed, tied, and then it's squeezed inside of this hibiscus bark. And Pohnpei is the only place where this is done. And apparently it creates the most powerful, like, slimy consistency. And when you drink it, it's, from what I've heard, it can be quite shocking and disgusting the first time you try it. But apparently just a couple cups or shells of this will kind of absolutely get you to a nice, relaxed state. And a lot of people, who drink it for the first time complain that they have 2 shells of it and then it's, time to go to sleep. And if you have a chance to look at this paper, there are some really great pictures of people preparing the kava and serving the kava. Another interesting aspect of the preparation of kava is that they have these rooms where people pound the kava, and there's a individual called the menende who's a caller, and the menende is related to the chief and is a respected person in the community and has knowledge of the title and the rank of the people present in this room. And this person oversees the preparation of the kava. And the different municipalities or the different villages, they call them municipalities in the paper, they have different rhythms that they break the stone on the kava, or they break the kava with the stone too. So there could be like a dun 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 in one village, and then in another village there could be like a dun 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 dun, something like that, and it distinguishes that community from other communities. But one thing in common is that there's a word that the menendai, this leader of the kava preparers, yells out, and it's sokama. And once the leader yells out sokama, that indicates that the pounding of the kava is over, that it's time to drink the kava. Now, when the kava is ready, the kava is served. The first 4 cups of the kava are presented to the highest ranking elders in the room as a sign of respect. And then kind of you go down the ladder in terms of social hierarchy to finally get to common people that can come from all over the village and come in and get a shell of kava. So super interesting difference there between Pohnpeian and other Pacific Island cultures in terms of kava preparation. Now, there is a great scientist, anthropologist, sociologist named Louis Lewin, who did a lot of really interesting research on psychoactive agents. And there's a quote that I like to refer to, and this article actually has the quote in full. And this is from 1931. But it's a beautiful quote that talks about the human yearning for discovering the inner depths of the mind and the kind of the world of possibilities that exist in consciousness and experimentation. And he actually did do some research with kava, with Piper methysticum, and he defined it as a hypnotic and a plant that is very good at inducing sleep. And here's a quote. I also found confirmation of the fact to which I have repeatedly alluded when speaking of the development of the use of such psychoactive substances, namely that there is no obstacle which can arrest the spread of a narcotic, not even the sea with its menacing dangers for the natives of these islands, not men alone, but the ocean itself yields to the power of narcotics. And it's interesting, that was said in 1931 because we now know that oceans and ports and their walls, the surveillance state, there's almost nothing that can stop the spread of drugs, of psychoactive plants throughout the world. And people are always willing and eager to try different ways to expand their minds and feel new sensations. So yeah, this part of the paper that I'm now discussing is on the effects of Sakau, as you might have guessed by that last couple of minutes of discussion there. The author does a really good job of talking about people's experiences with Sakau and talking about what I guess in the Kava online community we used to call like trip reports. in the early days when people would experiment with kava and talk about their experiences. And here's one of those experiences that the author quotes in full of somebody drinking Sakau in Micronesia. It kind of gets into my hips and I just start feeling really good. First I get the relaxing feeling physical, and then mentally my mood changes. I start to unwind and I start to enjoy the people I am with, and I want to joke and start being funny. It is a happy feeling and you are happy with everyone and just want to joke and you are really up. Then you start going the other way. Towards the end, I am sensitive to light and I don't really want to hassle with anything. I hit the pillow and I'm out. I wake up and pop right up and I feel great. Except sometimes you have a sick stomach if the water is bad. Yeah, good lesson. Use clean water. If you have the right amount of Sakau, it is like the grease that keeps you going. And the author talks about the effects of Sakau coming in two phases. The first being the initial stage that's uplifting and relaxing and conversational and communal. I think a lot of what we learn and hear about Tanoa and the Pacific Islands is used to describe this phase of kava consumption. If you go to a kava bar and throw back a bunch of shells, you might find yourself being talkative and learning a lot about the people sitting next to you. And that's really like the communal aspect of drinking kava that a lot of people talk about, a pro-social beverage, something that helps you kind of ease into the conversation, break the ice, kind of get things going. And then the second phase of kava feelings that you get, kava feelings, I like that, the kava effects that you get are a very relaxing, kind of hypnotic, sleepy, anxiolytic state, anti-anxiety, like kind of a little bit of a what you want to get when you smoke cannabis, but without this psychological like deterioration that occurs or the confusion that occurs. And so that's when kava becomes a powerful muscle relaxer and muscle loss of muscle control. So if you drink too much kava, you might find yourself like kind of stumbling around a little bit, but that's a lot. I mean, that's typically at kava bars in the US, we don't get to that point due to the kind of the nature of the kava that we drink. You might also get this sensation in your eyes where your optic nerve is relaxed and your eyes kind of like jump around or float around in your eye sockets. And I know that sounds kind of extreme, but I've definitely had that sensation before. So this paper does a really good job of talking about the effects of kava, and then the author, does go into the fact that clinically and in terms of science, like there hasn't been enough research done, and there needs to be more research done on the way that kava actually interacts with the biochemistry of the body. There is a really good testimony that follows that I want to read, and it's written by an ecologist named Clay Traurnicht, who was in Pohnpei in 2005, and he wrote extensively in his journal about kava and published it. And here's a couple paragraphs from his journal. The first cup produced a similar feeling to powdered dry root Polynesian kava I have tried. Slight and spreading numbing sensation beginning at the lips and tongue and spreading back towards the throat. This feeling was enhanced by the hibiscus bark coating my mouth and throat. I ingested 2 more draughts over the next 10 minutes and began to feel a mild euphoria by the third drink. The altered perception brought on by the Sakau felt like pleasant warmth settling over my mind, making the things happening around me seem both slightly fuzzy and amusing. This fuzziness did not manifest as any visual hallucination, but rather as an extreme mental relaxation that lessened my awareness of the details of the events and conversation taking place in my vicinity. Despite this shift in my perception of external stimuli, the lucidity of my own thoughts felt heightened. Over the next half hour of drinking kava, I became extremely talkative, focusing intensively on questions about the Pohnpeian language. There was also a shift in the overall mood and interactions I was having with the Pohnpeians drinking with me. Whereas most were quiet and reserved while we were pounding and preparing the Sakau, about a half hour or 45 minutes into drinking, they were much more receptive and enthusiastic about my questions and joking about my attempts at speaking the language. About an hour after beginning to drink, I got up to get dinner and felt the first physical effects of the Sakau. My legs did not give out from under me, but felt weak and less responsive. Although I was capable of supporting myself, my balance was slightly off, and there was a definite reduction in my coordination. I recall slipping several times on the tile floor and not feeling very confident or solid in my footing. At about 1.5 hours into the session, I started to feel a slight queasiness in my stomach. I am not sure if this was a result of the uneasiness on my feet or from the food, but I believe it began before I started eating. After standing up to get dinner, I remained more aware of the physical effects of the Sakau, consuming a couple mouthfuls of Sakau every 10 to 15 minutes. The mild queasiness remained but did not worsen. By about 2 hours or so into the 3-hour session, I began to feel slow, and the euphoria was replaced by a feeling of drowsiness. Now, the next few sections of this paper are also very interesting, and they talk about physiology and the way that Kava works on the body and like the Kava lactones. And they also talk about the use of Kava in treating anxiety. And I think it's worthwhile diving into this briefly. The author doesn't go into huge depth on this, but talks about it enough and with enough kind of novel perspectives to mention in this podcast. So for the physiological effects that Kava has on the body, these are kind of, it's better to think about these in terms of like the medicinal, non-psychoactive effects of Kava and how it can benefit the body outside of just the recreational use of it. So the author talks about Kava being studied in different ways and offers citations, which if you download a copy of this paper, you can see. I'm not going to mention them all here. There's a lot of references, but Kava can be used as a local anesthetic. It can be used as a muscle relaxant. I know a lot of people that do a lot of exercise, like the folks at Kava and Kettlebells, and I know that they use Kava as a way to relax their muscles after working out. It can be used as a sedative, as an anticonvulsant, an anxiolytic, and that's kind of that's a word to talk about treating anxiety, as an analgesic, antimycotic, I don't really know what that is, anti-inflammatory, and antithrombotic. And Kava, the active Kava lactones that act in the body, there's 18 Kava lactones that have been identified in the plant, and there are 6 that have therapeutic effects on the human biochemistry. And you've probably heard these before if you're even remotely a scholar or even a novice on Kava. But those 6 major Kava lactones are yanganin, kavane, dihydrokavane, methysticin, dehydromethysticin, flavokavane A, flavokavane B, and flavokavane C. And in terms of how quickly Kava hits the bloodstream, from my own personal experience, I would say that Kava hits you like right away. Like I always feel Kava like the minute that I pour it back. So like I can drink a shell of Kava, and within like I'd swear even like 20 seconds, my bloodstream is already like dancing and it's happy. It's like, oh, here's the Kava, thank you. Again, not addictive, but my body reacts very positively to Kava. The author talks about like some studies that were done, and I kind of took some issue with some of these estimates, but the author says that within the first 2 hours, the Kava consumer has a sense of friendliness and reduced anxiety and euphoria. I feel like those things come on a lot sooner than that, like within 30 minutes. I'm usually pretty friendly, outgoing, extroverted, even if I come in with like a baseline introvertedness. The lack of motor coordination kicks in, 4 to 5 hours after somebody drinks Kava, especially if they're drinking a lot of it. the muscle relaxation is due to effects on the calcium channels in the neuromuscular transmissions. And then you're going to get the blurry vision. Pupil diameter gets changed, which I actually didn't know about or think about until I read this paper. The sedative or sleepiness effects come after about 4 hours of kava. So, like, if you start drinking kava at 6 p.m., you can probably start thinking about going to sleep around 10 p.m. if you're using kava as a sleep aid. So, yeah, I mean, interesting stuff. I wish that the author had gotten a little bit more into this, but they didn't. So that's what we have. There's a section on kava and anxiety, or Sakau and anxiety. Is interesting because the author seems to side with the approach that kava is good for temporary relief from anxiety, but not like a long-term relief of anxiety or a treatment for anxiety. And again, like, because kava is a dietary supplement and is also sold as a food, we don't want to make medical claims about kava, but I can speak from anecdotal experience and say that for me, kava totally transformed my life and in a way completely defeated my anxiety. It took decades, so I'm not going to say that I can attribute my conquering of anxiety to kava, but kava definitely helped me keep progress in my fight with anxiety. So, like, when I was young, I struggled with very acute social anxiety. Like, I feared being in classrooms. I had all of these kind of psychosomatic symptoms that I would dream up, and I remember at times when I was in college, I would be sitting in a room of 40 or 50 people, and suddenly start like worrying that I might have Tourette's, which is totally not a thing that happens to me anymore, but at that time I had it. So there was like a little bit of like a hypochondria that I experienced with my anxiety disorder. And every day I would get home from class, and if I wasn't like having some drinks, like some beers with my buddies, I would make kava. And at that time it was just like kava tea or instant kava. But that would provide me with a lot of relief, and I would chat with my friends or go back to campus. I was at UC Santa Barbara, and go to the library, and there were like rooms where students and classes could get together to do study sessions. And after having a little bit of kava, I could go in and talk pretty freely, and successfully participate in these study sessions. And I carried that over into like my postgraduate life. I was in the Peace Corps, and when I was in the Peace Corps, I brought tons of boxes of kava stress relief tea with me, and that helped me get over anxiety when I was adjusting to life as a Peace Corps volunteer. So I tend to think, now as a 40-something, I feel like kava has helped me face and conquer anxiety so many times that I've become used to not being anxious. Certainly when I get stressed out, I still make some kava to feel better. So it still does play an important role in my fight with anxiety. But anyways, that's enough about me. The paper goes on to talk about the mechanisms that likely lead to a lower anxiety rate, and those include the kavaloctone's interactions with GABA, serotonin, and diazepine binding sites. Diazepine being like Valium, where Valium works on the body. The limbic areas of the central nervous system are reduced in their excitability, and there's a reduced reuptake of norepinephrine. And the two kavaloctones that are most associated with these anti-anxiety benefits are kavain and dehydrokavain, and they pass through the blood-brain barrier the most easily. All right, so the paper kind of jumps really quickly from these medical descriptions and discussions about anxiety back into the sociological, anthropological subjects. And the next section is about the use of Sakau in Pohnpei and its interactions with religion. Now, I'll just summarize this and not really quote it at length, although I would encourage everybody to read it. It's super interesting. But the main takeaway here is that there was a sectarian difference between how Kava was adopted in Pohnpei, where the Protestant evangelical churches condemned it as being this kind of satanic, evil thing that needed to be eradicated in order for people to be fully Christian and not pagan, according to these missionaries. And on the contrary, the Catholic Church was able to, as they have done successfully in many cultures, they were able to kind of graft Catholicism onto the Kava rituals and actually incorporate the consumption of Kava into Mass. So, like, people would go to the Catholic Church, and after Mass, they would drink Kava together and have conversations about their faith and the Bible. And, one of the reasons the Catholic Church has been so successful internationally in places like Latin America and Oceania, in Africa even, is because the Catholic Church allows the teachings of the Bible to be grafted onto local traditions and an anthropological phenomenon which is known as syncretism. And Santeria in Latin America is a good example of this, where the kind of African voodoo was syncretized with Catholic saints and other Native American traditions into this new cosmology and belief system that the Catholic Church was able to vibe with, or I guess complement, without creating a crisis of faith. And that helps both the church and the traditions of the people persist. I am just going to go ahead and jump to the conclusion of this paper. There's a section on the intentionality of Sakau, folk classification based on a declaration of purpose. That section is really interesting, but it's almost so anthropological and so sociological that it really warrants like a separate podcast. And I don't know that I'm really like the one who wants to do it, because although I found the section interesting, I wasn't super into it. Basically, the purpose of this section of the paper is to not only talk about the varieties and the cultivars of Kava, but the different uses of Kava in different contexts. So the author talks about Sakau and tihik, which is to speak with someone about local medicine. Sakau and puada, when you have something in particular to talk about. Sakau and pua, when you wish to have a general open conversation, and so on and so forth. So it's like the different uses of Sakau in different scenarios and different contexts, like using Kava at a wedding, using Kava at a funeral. Like the people in Pohnpei don't just talk about kalai and beer car and mellow mellow. They talk about Kava in terms of its use in different social functions. So worth looking at if you're interested. Again, I'll put a link to this paper in the YouTube comment section for you to peruse. So the author writes a nice little helpful conclusion at the end of the paper that I'd like to read in full. It's very short. From its divine origins and revered status in Pohnpeian traditional culture to its modern-day use in sacred ritual and recreational activity, Sakau is without doubt the most important plant on Pohnpei. It has influenced the way Pohnpeians view each other, their community, and the world ever since its arrival, presumably from Vanuatu via innumerable voyages, trading, and back migrations. There is still much to be learned about contemporary cultural use of Sakau, as well as the science of how its effects influence human physiology. Potentially, this plant could play a much more important role in global healthcare, but only if questions about the benefits as well as the adverse effects of some of its preparations are answered via research in basic science and clinical trials. We suspect the Sakau will continue to speak on Pohnpei for many generations to come, even as globalization exerts such a dramatic change on local lifestyle. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Tanoa Talk. I really, really love this paper. Again, it's The Sacred Root, Sakau and Pohnpei by Michael J. Balick and Roberta A. Lee. Excellent, excellent paper. Again, I will put a link to it in the comments of this YouTube video and on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Tanoa Talk with the Kava Sewer, and I look forward to the next episode. Bula, eternally to the hula.